friends, my name is Lucy and this is Patitas, and Patitas and I wanted to do a little video that we hope would benefit some people who may be just starting out with JavaScript, trying to learn a little bit of JavaScript and using it to do some work with the Canvas environment in Adobe Animate CC. My idea was that HTML has a very robust text tool, but the Canvas element, which lives in the HTML environment, it lives in HTML, it's an element of HTML, has a text tool which is very primitive. So the text that HTML itself uses is much superior. And so I thought maybe this might be something to supplement that text tool. So I wanted to show you how I have been doing it. You can use various elements, including any element that carries text as an input text. The idea of using an input text because input is totally missing. So anyway, I also wanted to introduce Patitas. So Patitas is a very good little boy. As you can see, a little 12-year-old parrot, and he behaves excellently except when I'm recording video. But he does add little sounds here and there, and I'm sure they're tolerable. But let me know if they are intruding too much. With that, let's get on with it and let's look at the interface in Adobe Animate CC. So here I am in the Adobe Animate CC interface, and I'm looking at this little project that I have been working on. It's in the form of a presentation, and I'm on frame 1. I have 4 frames in my project. Now just keep in mind that even though I call this frame 1, in JavaScript you will refer to it as frame 0 because JavaScript begins counting with 0. It's 0 based. Okay, so the idea is that I want to put a little text box right here, and I want my text box to be on kind of on the left side of the stage right here. I want it to appear right here, and I want it to be input text. So I'm going to use a div, a general purpose div. Okay, so for now, let me run this for you, and now I will do the test movie. And you know how you can do that. You can just click this little arrow. All right, so here we are. And here is the little text box that I was talking about. This is the div. And notice that I have included a couple of 2 more elements inside. They're separate little elements, although they are inside of the text. This one is for a little superscript, and this one is called a span. And a span is just a portion of text that you select and that you wish to employ different styling. Okay, now the present text that I put in here is just to greet the user. So here the user is Patitas, so I said, what is in your mind, Patitas? And I said, double click here to respond. When you're done, click the submit button. Here the text continues. So the user then says, okay, I'm going to double click. She or he double clicks, and it clears the space here, and it puts the focus on the box, and it's ready for entering text. So here Patitas enters something like Patitas is ready for action. Alright, be careful with Patitas. Then I noticed the submit button, so I click the submit button and it answers back to me, to the user. It says, here is your feedback, Patitas is ready for action. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Have a nice day. Once the user has done that, they might want to go to the next frame. And if they do go to the next frame, they will notice that there is no box there. And if they go to frame number 3, here is frame number 3, the box appears again. And here on frame number 3 has whatever it had on frame number 1, but you can change that, you can adjust that. And then you can go on to frame number 4. There is nothing here. And that's because the text box doesn't have to appear in every frame. You can disable it in any frame you want. So with that, we're gonna move on to look at the HTML page. So when you run your movie, you will notice that Adobe creates 3 files for you. And here they are. You have an FLA file, HTML file, and a JS file. We're going to take a look at the HTML file. I'm going to open it in a separate editor. When you first run your project, your ACC Canvas project, Adobe generates 3 files, including an HTML file. An HTML file is a document that stores the content that the browser like Chrome will display. The content is marked with these curious little symbols called tags. T-A-G-S. The tags appear in pairs most of the time. A tag, open tag, here is an HTML open tag, and here is the closing HTML tag. And this HTML tag, this particular pair of tags, enclose the entire document. It is called the document element. Yes. So every pair of tags enclose a piece of content that constitutes an element. So your page is made up of elements which are marked with tags. Let me open this little pair of tags, and then we see here inside that the document element, the one here designated with the HTML tags, is in fact made up of more elements. Here we have the head element, and then the body element. And if we were to open these other elements, there will be more elements inside. And since each element is designated by a tag, then we will see a whole bunch of tags. And the content inside of those tags are other tags. Hello there, more tags, more and more tags. This was full of tags. Okay, let me close this. All right. Anyway, when I flip this little arrow, or I twirl it, it opens up the inside of the body. And I notice inside of the body that there is one element called a div. This is the open tag. Let me highlight it for you. And here in the open tag, I noticed that there is a couple of things included inside of the open tag. One is called the ID, and that happens to be called an attribute, and also the style. The style is also an attribute. And this ID is special because we can use it with JavaScript. So it's sometimes a good idea to pay attention to the IDs of these elements. Then if you ever want to make a reference to that element using JavaScript, when you're writing your JavaScript, you can say, find me this element which has an ID of animation container. Okay. So now I can also twirl this little arrow here for the animation container div. Let me open it. And lo and behold, I find two more elements in here. And here is the famous element. The famous element that Adobe uses for its animation. And for all that graphical content that is displayed. So here is the canvas, and it has attributes as well, and the ID of the canvas is just canvas. So that's easy to remember, and because we might need it, we might have to reference the canvas. By that I mean that we might have to tell the browser, go look for this element with the ID of canvas. The other div, the other element contained in here is a div. And I'm not quite sure what its purpose is. I'm not gonna mess with it. My aim is to create a new element. And I want to put it right next to the canvas, right below the canvas. Right here. And what I want to include here is a new div. Okay. And my new div will contain the text that I need. Here I put the text. All right. So yeah, the text that you want to include here, I want to include here. But I'm not going to do this here, right here on this editor. Instead, I'm going to do it inside of Animate. Then Animate will send a message to create this element, this new element. And I will show you how to use JavaScript to create new elements. So with that, let's close this up and let's head on to Animate CC. So now, before we jump into the code, I want to take you to see the DOM, D-O-M. The DOM lives in JavaScript. So we're going to go to W3 Schools. This is a very good place to find the DOM and to find everything related to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and many other languages. Okay, but we are interested in JavaScript. So let's go to the JavaScript reference. And here is the DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. If you remember, the document is the whole page, beginning with the HTML element and contains all the elements of the page. Okay, JavaScript organizes its code in objects. So the document object contains, and let me take you to the document object. There are various objects. Here, these are all HTML objects. They're called DOMs. The DOM for the document, the DOM for the element in general, and the DOM for the style, which is the ones we're going to use. So let's go first to the DOM for the document. So a DOM is a collection of properties and methods. In this case, properties and methods that affect the document. And here is a list of those properties and methods. And there's quite a few of them. Some of these are properties and some are methods. You can tell them apart because the property is just simply the property name. Like this one just says active element. That's the name of the property. Whereas the method has a pair of parentheses at the end. The difference, as I understand it, is that the property returns a value, or it can also reset a value in some cases. In some cases, it can do both. It can return a value, and you can also assign a specific value, so you can reset the value. When it only returns a value, it's said to be only read-only. But when it is able to do both things, it can return a value or reset its value, then we say it's read and write. Okay. A method also is different from a property in that it carries out a task. It does something for you. It may return a value as well, but it does carry out something. It is a sequence or a series of commands inside of the method. A method is the same thing as a function, but it's a special function. A function is a set of lines of code that have a name. And so this method has a name, and it's followed by a pair of parentheses. Okay, inside of the parentheses, sometimes you're required to add some information. Okay, I also wanted to mention how to access these properties and methods. So in your code editor, in the code editor, if you want to call a property or a method that belongs to the document object, to the document DOM, then what you need to do is write the word document. You want to reference the name of the object first, because this is telling the browser, go to the document DOM or the DOM document. Go to the DOM document and look for this property or look for this method. And you supply the name of the method, but follow that with a dot. So you write document dot, and then the name of the property or the name of the method. And again, for the property, if you have to set the value of the property, then you put an equal sign followed by the value that you want to reset that property with. Okay, on the other hand, if you want to receive a value, then you need to prepare a special variable to receive it. So you say my variable, var, whatever, my variable equals, and then you write document dot active element or whatever. But I want to mention also some of the properties and methods from this object, from the document object, that I want to use in my code. I want to use the create element method. And I also want to use the get element by ID. And with that, I'm going to move on to another DOM that I want to show you. So there is also the DOM element. And let me click that to show you the DOM element. Okay, so here we are in the HTML DOM element object. And here is a list of properties and methods also for the element. But this is no longer just for the object. This is not for the document. This is for the particular element. So if you have a div and you want to manipulate it in some way, you want to change it or you want to do something to it, then you need to use the properties and methods available here. And here the ones that I am interested in using, let me see, one called inner HTML, and that's a property. And another one which is really important is content editable. Because I want my div, the one I want to create, to have content that is editable by the user, that the user can change, then I want to use this property. And there may be something else, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure there are so many of these properties and methods you can use, like the remove method to get rid of the element. You once you use it and you say I don't need it anymore, you can remove it. Okay. Another DOM that I'm interested in using is the style, the DOM style. All right, before I move out of the DOM element, let me show you the style property. I had forgotten about the style property. Here towards the bottom is a style property right here. And this is very important because the style allows you to manipulate the appearance of the property. I'm sorry, the appearance of the element, the appearance of the div. I want the div this color, I want the div this size, I want the div this whatever, okay? And so the style is a property. However, it is also a DOM. It has its own DOM. So let me click the DOM here for the style. And here in the DOM style, notice that you have a lot of properties. These are all just properties. But it's in alphabetical order so you can find them, but it's a lot of them. And if you have some familiarity with the CSS, you will notice that these are all CSS properties as well. For instance, background color or just color. There are many background properties here. Now, to access a style, you would need to write first the element, then the style property. So you write element, whatever element it is, for instance my div dot style, and then dot property of the style, because the style has its own properties. So the background color, for instance, so you would put that background color, then put an equal sign, and then you set that color. So all of these properties are also read and write. Notice all of them say sets or returns, set or return. Those are read and write. I'm going to move on now to the code. So now we're ready for the code. And the code is asleep right now. I deliberately put it to sleep, but I'm going to revive it one line at a time. So I'll start with the first line. Here I wrote edText. edText is just a variable that I had declared earlier. I declared that in the global scope, and to find the global scope, I go to the global over here on the left side of, if you're familiar with this layout, there is a part here that says global, then twirl the little arrow and click script. And here is where I declared my variable. I did that because I wanted it to be global in scope, because I want to use it in the other frames as well. One of the things that Adobe does when it assembles your code is that it puts it into closures called functions. So this is a function right here. All the code you put in frame 1 And here I designed a whole layer for my code. In frame 1, I put the code for frame 1, code for frame 2 is here, and so on and so on. All right, so Adobe closes those with functions, and that makes the variables not be able to communicate with each function. So edit text is global, but it would be recognized everywhere. So now I set that equal to document.createElement. So createElement, if you remember I mentioned this, is a method, and the method has a pair of parentheses. And in the parentheses, it requires that you specify the kind of element you want to create. And so you go by the name of the tag. So for instance, you want to create a P, so you put a P. You want to create a form, you put a form. You want to create a table, you put table, etc. So but at any rate, in my task, I just wanted a div. And I enclosed it with quotes, double quotes, because it requires a string. So that's one thing I have to remember pretty much about JavaScript, is that most of the time when you have to enter information, they like it to be in the form of a string. I mean, JavaScript likes it that way. I don't care. So I put quotes. Don't forget to put the same kind of quotes. If you put a single quote here and a double quote here, the browser will go crazy. All right, but anyway, the createElement method will create an element for you. And because it belongs to the document DOM, I had to write the word document. Okay, so this deposits my div inside of edit text. And so now anytime I want to refer to my div, I call it edit text. The second line of code, I declare a local variable called a constant. And a constant is a variable as well as the var. The keyword const refers to a variable that doesn't change in value. So if you want this to change in value later on in the code, during the code, then you may want to use something like a var, var, or the word let, L-E-T. Okay, but I don't need this to change, so I call it const, and the name I gave it to is canvas. So I want the canvas, and the canvas is already in existence. So I'm going to call another method from the document DOM. So I'll write document.getElement by ID. And since I know that the canvas, there's only one canvas element and it has the ID of canvas, I wrote canvas. Okay, so now I have the canvas in this variable. Okay, so the next line of code, the canvas, the reason I wanted the canvas is because I want to insert right after the canvas, adjacent to the canvas, an element. And so I use this method called insert adjacent element, which is found in the elements DOM. In the elements DOM, you find insert adjacent element. And insert adjacent element requires 2 bits of information. Some people call them perimeters. That's what goes inside of the parentheses, separated by a comma. Okay, the first one is where do you want to insert it? I want it right after, not before, but after the canvas. So I put after end. Okay, and again I found this in the DOM, so I always go back to the DOM and look for this insert adjacent element, and you will get this information there. Okay, then I wrote the element that I want to insert there, and it's my edit text. My edit text will go here. Incidentally, edit text to remind me that this is editable text. Okay, Then the next thing I wanted to put some text in it, initial text. So I wrote my little text string. This is a string. The whole thing that you see here, purple, is a string, and that's what's going to be inside of my ed text. And it's an inner HTML. And inner HTML here is a property. It's a property that belongs to the element. It's in the element's DOM. And because it's in the element's DOM, I can use it with ed text. So I put ed text dot inner HTML. So as soon as you created your div, you also created all those properties and methods that belong to the ed text. And so you're allowed to call them up and say ed text.inner HTML. All right, there was another property called inner text. I could have used that one too, but I wanted an inner HTML because I want to include a little bit of HTML inside. For one thing, I want to put a break, a line break. So I wanted this element inserted in there. I wanted to insert another element called a superscript right here. And I wanted to insert another one over here called a span. Okay, and it's right here. Okay, and basically the string says, what's in your mind, patitas. And by the way, this forward slashes that I put here at the end is just to tell my editor, this editor that Adobe has, that is part of the whole string, okay? Not to break it up. Okay. And I put a break here because I wanted what's in your mind, patitas, to be in one line. Okay, so the next line would say, double click here to respond. And when you're done, click the submit button. And then submit button, I wanted it to be with different text formatting and different coloring and different properties. So then I wanted this to be in a span. So I put a span around it. Okay. And then I added at the end, here the text continues. Okay, so I'm done with that. The next line of code, I bring out another very important property. Okay, this is a property that people may not be familiar with because by default, these texts are not editable by the user. If you want to make them editable, all you have to do is call the content editable property, which is found again in the DOM, in the element DOM. This is found in the element DOM. And content editable has two values that you can assign to it. You can assign the value true or the value false. By default, it's false. So I'm going to put true because I want the user to be able to use it. Okay, one more line of code, and this one is just calling a method that I created. This is it's really a function, it's not a method. A method would have to be inside of an object. Mine is just here. It's inside of another function. So edit text styles, that's what I called it. And I created the function down here. Let me revive the function. Let me remove the comment. So now I wrote function edit text styles. When you write a function, you put the parentheses and then you put the curly braces. And the curly braces simply enclose all the lines of code that make up the function. And in this particular function, we will be dealing only with the style of the element. And so I will be using repeatedly the style property. and the display, or rather the other properties that pertain to the style. So the styles properties in the style DOM. I'll be talking to you about that in the next video.